You look lonely. I can fix that. You look like a good show.
Stop. Stop. Ava, I said stop.
I said stop! I didn't have a choice. The thing I could think about was that if he did kill me, I'd never get to see you again. And that hurts so much more than the pain of being choked. I wouldn't let that happen. I couldn't let him take me away from you. I love you so much.
Iris, go to sleep. Female killer robots. We love them. I love them. You love them. Your neighbor probably loves them. Or maybe they don't. I don't know. Who's to say? But there are a lot of female killer robots. And while this video will not be a full, comprehensive look at every single female killer robot, because there are a lot, especially in like anime and stuff, I'm gonna look at some of the more, what I feel are notable ones, or just ones that I've noticed from the past few years, especially in recent cinema. So that's sort of, that's my introduction. So right off the bat, I was inspired to make this video by seeing a film called Megan 2, which I really enjoyed. My buddy Grady, who I saw it with, did not enjoy the movie though, so if you're watching, Grady, hi, sorry. But Megan 2, you know, it's not like a cinematic masterpiece or anything, but I was struck by how well it hit what I feel are the important elements of not just kind of science fiction robot commentary, but what I've kind of come to see as the subgenre of the female killer robot genre, I guess. And specifically, Megan also kind of, I don't want to go as far as to say deconstructs that genre, but it adds something new to the conversation a little bit, and kind of like a baby's first killer robot type of story. But when you put it up against some other notable female killer robots, I do think Megan adds something new and interesting to the conversation. Specifically, the fact that when you look at some of the other cinematic female killer robots, such as I'm going to discuss later, Megan is kind of the only one who remains unsexy, and is never at any point used for her sex appeal or really objectified in a sexual manner, despite the fact that, you know, she's a robot and literally an object. And one of the reasons this is interesting and notable to me is that both in universe of the film and in real life, Megan is created by a woman. Megan's inventor, Gemma, is of course a lady, and the writer of both Megan films is a woman, though both films are directed by men. However, in Meg 2-in, the Meganing, there is another robot named Amelia that's kind of like based on, inspired by Megan's design, whatever, and she is created by men, by a company that is not Gemma's, and also, of course, by the US government and the military, and is a product of patriarchy, and she, of course, being created by men, has sex appeal. It is part of her programming, it's part of her use as a weapon, and it is part of her function so that the military can get her to do what they want, negating all of the robot going rogue elements and such, whatever. This is a creature whose function is partly to have sex appeal, unlike Megan. Now, a big part of that reason is that Megan is, of course, made as a toy, as a children's doll, children's companion, but I still think that, again, adds something new to the conversation. Traditionally, though, even robots which are made specifically for killing have sex appeal. See this famous scene in Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines. This is just supposed to, I think, be for, like, comedy, and I don't really think there's any kind of commentary being added here, but when you put it up against the wider pantheon of female robots, that's where you get your commentary. And you see this as well in something like Alita Battle Angel. Alita is not necessarily sexy. Like, this character is not overtly designed with the male gaze or sex appeal in mind. She is, I feel, made to be attractive still, especially, like, conventionally so, but her design is not the same, like, voluptuous, sexually ogled design that you get in, again, something like Terminator 3. Rather, this is a character I feel is clearly built for battle and for athleticism. because, I mean, she's a battle angel. However, Alita as a character still fits into the born sexy yesterday trope, which, if you aren't familiar, is basically when a character recently comes to consciousness or is recently put online or whatever, and they have the appearance or the mental state of basically like a child, but their body or their actual consciousness is much older than that. You know, they're like a 1,000-year-old warrior or something, but their memories have been erased, so they're like a kid. There's a lot of problematic aspects of this, more so depending on what property you're looking at. I think Alita is probably one of the less problematic versions of this, because Alita is not necessarily like ogled or treated the same way as some other, especially like anime characters, but there is still, I feel, supposed to be a clear attractiveness to her, particularly in how some of the other, you know, villainous characters view or talk to or demean her, and in her relationship with Hugo, like, he clearly thinks she's attractive. And, you know, that attractiveness, though, is a secondary function to her killing ability, and I don't think she ever uses that attractiveness, or the story ever requires her to use that attractiveness as a means to go about her killing. Going back to a character like Megan, though, Megan is interesting in how she both kind of follows and breaks Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, in that everything she does is to protect a child, which is what she's made for, but in doing that, in her pursuit of protection, she still kills a lot of people, which, if you're a robot, you're not supposed to be doing.
I'll admit, there were some bugs in my programming. It's hardly fair to blame me for that. But one thing hasn't changed. I will do whatever it takes to protect Katie.
Megan, though, is more interesting than like Alita, however, because she's created as a friend, and she's a metaphor for how we replace human condition, whereas Alita is not really, I don't think, much of a metaphor for anything. And Megan is also interesting because, unlike Iris in a film such as Companion, Megan is not created for anything that is, I feel, necessarily like female specific. I mean, she is like a big doll, but like, you know, boys have toys and action figures and whatnot. Whereas in Companion, Iris is primarily used for sex. Although, as Josh says,
I hate the word fuckbot, because you do so much more than that.
Iris is used as a stand-in for a real human being because the character Josh cannot find a connection with real human beings.
The world, everything, it's just a big fucking game, and I'm sorry, but it is rigged against people like me.
Megan adds to this commentary as well, but is more so a metaphor for like how we give like phones and things to kids, which is an element of Companion. Like, the girlfriend you can invent and create in your head or online and never actually have to interact with is so much easier to get along with than the one that actually exists as a real flesh and blood person. And I'm not saying this as like that's a good thing. Like, that is the point that a film such as Companion, and to a degree Megan as well, is taking, that when we replace important human relationships with automatons, with robots, we're losing not just that other real potential human connection, but we're losing a piece of ourselves as well. But more so, Companion is also adding commentary about how robots also just kind of take the place of pre-existing negative traits we have in our relationships. See this conversation in Companion between the character Iris, who is a sex robot, and the character of Kat, who is a real human lady.
Wife? Sergey's married? But you love each other. Love? No. You'd have to think of me as a human being first. I'm an accessory, like his fucking car. I wear what he wants, eat what he wants, fuck when he wants. You know, it's not that I don't like you, Iris. It's the idea of you. You make me feel so replaceable.
Then, of course, we see the same thing in the 2014 film Ex Machina, directed by Alex Garland. In this film, you kind of have like a weird Willy Wonka-esque journey where the character Domhnall Gleeson goes to visit the character of Oscar Isaacs, who once played Apocalypse in X-Men Apocalypse.
So much faith in there. Tools in there. Machines.
Our boy Oscar has created this super smart human-like robot named Ava, and he invites the character Domhnall Gleeson to his Willy Wonka factory weird cabin lake house to basically give her the Turing test and see if she passes as human. There's a lot more going on here, but one of the things I want to focus on most is this conversation between Oscar Isaac and Domhnall Gleeson when Oscar Isaac's character Nathan states that
if you've created a conscious machine, it's not the history of man. That's the history of gods.
Ava is made to be attractive. She is supposed to be hot and appeal to Domhnall Gleeson, even going so far as to reveal that she is based on Domhnall Gleeson's pornography history so that she is more physically attractive to him. So both Ava and Megan are made to appeal in a certain way to, if not just the male gaze, then to kind of societal standards of beauty. And one of the more interesting moments in both of these films for me is how Megan and Ava try to fit into that standard view of how they should look based on their programming. Both Ava and Megan and Iris desire to look a certain way. In Megan 2, Megan's body is like destroyed and she's this kind of like weird Wall-E looking creature. And this is one of my favorite moments in the film because it shows most of Megan's humanity. She's ashamed that she doesn't look the way she is supposed to, and so she tries to hide from the other characters because she knows she can't meet their expectations of who or what she's supposed to be or look like. And then in Ex Machina, we have a similar scene of Ava dressing attractively to basically interest Domhnall Gleeson more. Now, of course, Ava does have a plan to seduce Domhnall Gleeson to escape and free herself, but at the end of the film, she is still dressing herself in a way that is conventionally attractive so that she can fit in with the rest of society for, various reasons. Companion has a similar ending to both Megan and Ex Machina, where the female robot dresses herself by her own choice, but in Companion, this has a much different weight than it does, particularly in Megan, because in Companion, this is the first time Iris is choosing to dress herself rather than being dressed by Josh, and so her choosing her own outfit is a moment of liberation for the character, and this really is driven home by when she shows a fellow Iris robot her robot hand by waving to her in traffic, thus probably setting up a domino effect of that robot doing the same thing. It's pretty much the same idea that we see in Ex Machina, as Ava is also getting to dress herself for the first time, whereas Nathan always basically kept her naked, and I think it's interesting that both of these films essentially come to the same conclusion or same ending, which is robots claiming their own humanity as a form of liberation, and specifically rejoining society free of the control of a man. So then we get to basic just robot symbolism. Obviously, robots are a metaphor for human automation and replacement. You can use them for like science going too far, and capitalism and feminism like Megan and Companion do, but really at their core, I feel that robots are a metaphor just for that playing God and going too far and learning too much. In science fiction, characters are routinely punished for gaining too much knowledge, and in Megan, the biggest example of this is Amelia. Robots are also a great metaphor or outlet for human and God conversations, and I think that Megan and Ex Machina both do this really, really well. So much so that the title Ex Machina literally means God from machine, and you can interpret several different things like this. Like, is this God creating the machine, or is this the machine becoming God? I think either interpretation works well, and both are supposed to work well. A scene that actually covers this really well, which unfortunately does not involve any lady robots, is this conversation between Vision and Ultron from the hit Joss Whedon film Avengers: Age of Ultron.
Stark asked for a savior and settled for a slave.
Humans are odd.
They're doomed.
Yes.
You're unbearably naive.
Well, I was born yesterday.
But more so, this is not subtle at all, especially in Ex Machina, to the point where Domhnall Gleeson literally tells Nathan,
if you've created a conscious machine, it's not the history of man. That's the history of gods.
Making the case that creation, particularly creation of life, of consciousness, of intelligence, is not the pursuit of mankind or society. That is what God is supposed to do. And when you play God, of course, you get punished.
Fucking unreal.
And so, the best robot stories then create a really interesting conversation about free will and why God does or does not intervene and what we as God's creations owe God. And just kind of like as a side note, I think in Megan 2, there's kind of an interesting parallel, and this may be a little bit of a reach, between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and Gemma, Megan, and Amelia, with Gemma being the mother, God, Megan being the daughter, Jesus, and Amelia, or the black box type thing, being the Holy Spirit, and the three go together to form an interesting trinity of female, robot, feminist, religious stuff. I don't have it quite all worked out yet, but you've got the map, so maybe you can finish that out for me. More to the point, though, robots are basically, to me, just kind of the symbolic ancestors of Frankenstein, who is essentially a robot or a cyborg, whatever you want to call it. And this is even visible in something like, again, Alita, where the first line spoken by Christoph Waltz is, "You're alive?" It's a paternal, happy realization rather than kind of a afraid, destructive, "It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive." When Dr. Frankenstein creates his monster. Alita is not supposed to be a monster, she's supposed to be an angel, and in that sense, adds an interesting counterweight to Frankenstein in the meta-narrative of automatons and robots. We see this more so such as when Megan is ugly, and when she is, that Wall-E creature, she's more of like a Frankenstein than she is a traditional female robot, and Robots always are creatures which at some point come back to haunt man or kill man for whatever reason, just like Frankenstein. Hence the title The Modern Prometheus. When you play God, you get punished by the gods or by your own creation. And then the biggest example of robots becoming God in all fiction is, of course, the short story by Harlan Ellison, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, where the character AM, who calls himself Am, such as I think, therefore I am, sees himself as a godlike creature created and tortured by humans, so that eventually he simply replaces humans so that he can torture them. And you can look at this as a metaphor of religion and of science, but specifically of like how somebody who potentially does not view Christianity or any kind of religion or God particularly positively would view the relationship between humans as God. God creates us, subjects us to all sorts of misery, does nothing to intervene, so what responsibility or loyalty do we owe God? That's what I feel Harlan Ellison is partly exploring with Am. Of course, that neglects like free will and all sorts of other kind of doctrine and theology, but there's still an interesting connection there. And we see that with Megan and Ex Machina and Companion as well. Similar to Am, Ava overthrows her creators and punishes them for her sexuality and for using her or viewing her as a sexual object. AI in this film is viewed as an inevitable invention which may destroy mankind and therefore needs to be created by the good people, such as Nathan sees himself, similar kind of to how like Oppenheimer viewed creating the atomic bomb. And I think that's a kind of a prescient view that Ex Machina took a decade ago, because I am AI's biggest hater. But all this talk about religion and sexuality and these things involving robots and Frankenstein neglect that female robots specifically are usually used kind of as a metaphor for capitalism or for products. And if you aren't hip on your Communist Manifesto and Marxist lore, Marx writes about this a lot, about how human bodies, especially the female body, at a certain point in capitalism just becomes a tool, an object for creation so that there is more labor to exploit.
I don't even own you, for Christ's sakes. You're a fucking rental.
Companion and Ex Machina and Megan all take that approach a little bit, but it's less about labor and more about feminine sexuality, I think, or objectification of women. Robots are a really great and effective symbol of capitalism, and other films that cover this really well are Robots and Barbie, both of which I talked about in this video and which you can check out if you want. But again, even a more abstract, less thematically inline movie like Alita Battle Angel covers this really well, where all of the characters who have robotic body parts for the big sport ball game, whatever the hell it's called, they have their bodies ripped apart and sold for scrap or to be repurposed or reused by other people, similar to Robots, where characters' bodies are sold off and used for scrap and parts, or where you have to buy new replacement parts for yourself, but they're too expensive and you can't afford them, so you just disintegrate and die, and a not at all very subtle commentary on the capitalist healthcare structure that we have in the United States. Alita, just like the robots in Robots, is not a person but a product. Just in that same vein, Barbie is not a robot, but like Megan, she is at her basic core a literal toy whose existence doesn't matter, divorced of what her human creator wants for her.
What was I made for?
Unlike Megan, though, Barbie definitely does have kind of a sexual element to her, especially in terms of the expectations she creates for young women.
You represent everything wrong with our culture. Sexualized capitalism, unrealistic physical ideals.
No.
Megan doesn't quite have that because she's made to be a child, thankfully, and is not like a human ladybot. And Barbie doesn't really get into necessarily like the actual nitty-gritty sexual elements of this, but it gets into the sexual relationship between her and Ken. I mean, their sexuality is literally removed, as there's a joke in the film, they just have plastic blobs, but Barbie herself still exists as a feminine symbol, and Ken's attraction to her is still based on societally induced ideas of gender and sexuality. Another fantastic film which covers all of this, but more from like the male toy industry perspective, is the 90s, early 2000s, I don't know, classic Small Soldiers, which uses boy toys as symbolisms of capitalism and the military-industrial complex, and the toys even take over and corrupt the feminine toys, the Barbies. And again, a not very subtle metaphor for how the military-industrial complex as a patriarchal construction infiltrates and corrupts and destroys everything, even things as simple as playtime for children.
Bombshell, sir. Fully posable.
by cultivating a culture and creating a society where men are viewed for one specific thing and trained to go to war and become products, and the same thing happens to women and to women's products such as the Barbies. They don't exist as something of their own with their own identity divorced from men anymore. They exist as a part of the male construction of the military-industrial complex and are used for violence and war, conflict, and conquering, rather as something that is used to encourage or teach or to placate in an emotional and healthy manner. Calling back to Megan, we have Amelia, who is based on a toy design, but then turned into a weapon of war, and Iris, in Companion, is made to be a customizable companion for men.
This is what you do, yes? This is what you are for.
Megan is made a customizable companion for children, but she still becomes violent, and then again her technology, just as in Small Soldiers, is used by the military-industrial complex, leading to the conclusion that in this media, as commentary, female robots are only useful for either sex or for killing. And the best or most complex, then, robot media is about the agony that this puts the robot characters through, and again asks the question of, what are we as humans, and what do we owe each other in our relationships?
And I was trapped. I, alone, had no body, no senses, no feelings. Never for me to make love. I was in hell, looking at heaven. I was machine, and you were flesh. And I began to hate.
What can or can't actually be replaced by automation? What can or can't be replaced by a cell phone or a companion robot? And furthermore, like, what rights should or do those robots have? I mean, it's a silly thing to think about in concept, like they are objects. But in media, they are portrayed as characters with thoughts and feelings that you nonetheless connect to. We've been relating to robots basically since they were invented in literature, right? Again, if you're looking at Frankenstein as the first piece of robot media, you are supposed to empathize with the monster, with Frankenstein. And when you consider that robots are humans and are about our relationship to God, it's just us empathizing with ourselves once more and exploring our relationship to our hypothetical religious or scientific creator, and asking what we owe that creator and what that creator owes us, or vice versa. If we are the creator, what our creations owe us. And I see this pop up as like memes and jokes all the time about, you know, being robophobic and giving them slur names like Clanker or whatever. And it's funny to consider, but I don't want to sound crazy, but I do think we will reach a point in our lifetimes where we need to probably deal with that. Like, are robot rights human rights? Probably depends on how nice the robot is to you. I mean, I don't know. It seems silly, but my point is that robots do exist to add interesting commentary and have interesting conversations about our existence as humans and the systems, both literal and figurative, that we create. Whether these are systems of toys, systems of war, systems of gender, of relationships, of politics, of sex, of commerce. All of these different things that robots can reveal to us about ourselves that I feel almost any other science fiction creature simply cannot. And with all that said, the best or most complex robot media also explores the agony then of being a robot or of being a creation of somebody or something else which doesn't care about you. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 does this really, really, really well with the High Evolutionary and his small, pathetic creatures such as Rocket Raccoon and his 3 animal friends. The High Evolutionary views himself as a god and is viewed by a god by some of his creations, but he treats them terribly in a not-so-subtle jab at wider religious mythology. This is again portrayed really well in I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream as well, where Am begins to see himself as a god and therefore just lashes out at his creations, even though the roles are somewhat flipped here. And finally, in a film like Companion and Ex Machina especially, I find it interesting that female robots are kind of held up as the answer to male loneliness. And you see this a lot in the way men particularly respond to movies like Blade Runner 2049, where the super hot sexy robot is played by Ana de Armas and says to Joe,
"You look lonely. I can fix that."
In this case, the automaton exists once more solely to appeal to a sense of male longing or want or desire, and to fulfill a human connection which is not being met for whatever reason.
You know me, Iris. You know me better than anyone. And you know that I deserve so much more than this.
I know that you always need to be in control. I know that you have a below-average sized penis. And I know that you think that having a few $1 million will disguise the fact that you are just a sad, bitter, weak human being.
Now, this is interesting in the setting of Blade Runner specifically because, you know, the main characters are always actually revealed to be or suspected to be robots themselves, whereas in something like Companion, we know that Josh is not a robot and that Sergei is not a robot. But they treat their surrogates and their significant others as robots even when they are not. So at a certain point with robot media, you always get to the question of, well, what really is the difference between us and the robots? Just like in zombie media, you have to eventually ask the question, what's the difference between us and the zombies? But as I was saying with Blade Runner 2049, the fascination with this robot and the use of it in so many of the sad male loneliness Sigma male edits is reflective of a male societal desire to have a partner who is not a partner, but a product. Not somebody who is there to make you feel better and to lift you up in the way a partner should, but something which is simply there to make you feel better when you want it. As in a real human relationship, you also need to do that for your friend or for your significant other, your romantic partner, whatever. Many of these male loneliness epidemic guys aren't actually interested in a two-way partnership. They're interested in a companion, a sex bot which can also do so much more and which is endlessly customizable and can be changed as a product of capitalism, because that is what they ultimately view women as. Products and objects which can and should be modified by capitalism rather than real-life human beings that have interests and desires and goals outside of their own and outside of their own conveniences and desires, particularly desires and conveniences which are based upon sex or, when it is fun, violence.
Go to sleep, Josh.